Okay, so welcome to another of the TeachPD series. This time round, we're looking at online audience engagement. We run this session in a couple of different ways, depending on the time of the year and the type of tools that people are particularly interested in. But we try, where possible, to focus in on the tools that CSU has a license for. So whereas I know there are a number of great tools that can be used for audience engagement, Mentimeter and Zoom represent the ones that we have enterprise licenses for, which means staff get unlimited access to their features, and we can technically provide support for. So if you sort of start using other tools, etc., and reach out saying, why isn't this working? These two we can sort of usually get to the bottom of, if it's either something to do with settings, etc., as opposed to some of the more free audience engagement tools. I could throw a few names out there like Kahoot, Poll Everywhere, and other types of tools, which you may be familiar with. And I'm not saying that they're not good and don't have value. It's just that we don't have licenses for them. And so supporting them can be problematic. And also just there's usually limitations in and around free users with those tools. So we're going to have a look at Menti and Zoom today. I'm going to give hopefully some broad stroke sort of information about them, but most of the time I would like to spend actually using the tools, building within the tools, and showing you how they work so that you can go away from here using those. So broadly speaking, we'll have a little bit of a chat about the context for online audience engagement tools and where we're coming from with these. We're going to be looking at these two, Menti and Zoom polls. There are slides in there about teaching ideas and Q&A, but to be honest, I would rather focus on using them and building within them so that you can go away thinking about what you would like to do with them. So we'll see how we go, time permitting. What we're talking about in this context is that we have tools that try and focus on getting the audience involved, participating. Sometimes people talk about lifting the energy levels in online contexts. If you've been in a number of sessions, as I'm sure you had, where the energy levels are not amazing because people are watching a whole lot of stuff being presented at them. They stay on mute, their cameras are off, and it becomes a very, very passive arrangement. Engagement tools, by and large, are intended to reverse that and get people involved and hopefully make them feel like they're a part of what's being delivered. It's a way to solicit ideas, get people's opinions, provide feedback loops, a sense of valuing that your participants are there and involved, as opposed to you all just have to be here because that's what we're doing. Alternate channels for feedback or to have specific needs identified. That's quite a particular thing. And I think you would probably have to be a fairly high-end user of these types of tools to set up ways of using audience engagement tools to identify special needs of individuals. That's quite a specific use case for that. And I'm happy to talk with people about that offline if they have something in mind. As I mentioned, there's the idea is a shift away from didactic teaching, passive delivery, to collaborative delivery. With these tools, there is potential for both of them to be used both in live delivery and asynchronously. So that means that the tool stays live or the activity stays live after your event and can be embedded, for example, in a subject site or elsewhere, and can continue to be updated if that has value. So an example might be word cloud type activities that get used in an online session, but then get embedded in your subject site, and students can continue to vote or participate in that, providing input over time, even after the live event. So there are use cases for both live and asynchronous, but most of the time these tools are created in the first instance with live delivery in mind. And that kind of the asynchronous idea then leads to this idea of how much planning you're putting into this in terms of pre, during, and post delivery, if there's an intention for there to be a cycle of some sort. But it all comes down to obviously how you want to use the tool. All right, I think the best way to get into this is to potentially start doing a few online audience engagement activities. what I'm going to start with Mentimeter before I start looking at the back end is a couple of activities to get our toes wet. Usually what we do with Menti is we're providing a link to the audience to engage with the activity. That's usually how I like to use it. So I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to put a link straight into the chat for the audience members to click on and engage with. At the same time, I'm going to bring up what we call the output window or the results for this tool. So at the same time as you're voting, and if I open that same voting portal link that I've given to you, no longer active, what's up with that? All right, did we all see that message? All right, let me find what's going on there. This is all part of the intended delivery of today's session, I'm sure. PD workshops, Menti activities. I'll get into the back end and explain all of this in a second, but I just want to find out why this isn't working. Temporary voting, no thanks. Is that the same link I gave to you? It is not. Oh, have a new link. Have a new link. There we go. Okay, can everyone see that when they click on the link? Okay, great. So what we're talking about here is the voting portal where the audience gets to engage and vote. The other thing that we need is the output or the results. I'm going to get that again. I should have had that ready, but it looks like I got the wrong link, which is not handy. And I will get that link in a sec. Sharing live results. Let's get into that. Okay, so this is our output window. And when we're working with Mentimeter, we're getting the voting portal, which most of the time you probably aren't going to show on the screen. You give the link to the audience to engage with. They start putting in their results, but you do show the output window most of the time. And it updates live on the spot. And that can be part of the engagement, the visual element for it. And it basically, I've got here straight multiple choice, pretty bland. Karina has a question. Let's do it.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, and you might be covering this in a moment, but I've noticed that you've gone in through your web browser, but in the past I've gone directly into Mentimeter through Zoom. Is that something that's coming later? I've just jumped ahead.
It's a good question. I'm going to provide I'm not talking too much about the Zoom Menti integration today because I'm very disappointed in how it works or doesn't work. It's really glitchy.
Yeah.
It requires way too much of the audience to have already signed up and done things both to Zoom and Mentimeter to work effectively.
Okay.
And so I've taken the standpoint that until Mentimeter and Zoom get their act together, I generally stick to providing the link for the audience to vote in myself because it's a one-stop, click on that and do something.
Yeah.
And showing the output window myself. I've just found it way too time consuming dealing with supporting the Menti Zoom integration.
Yeah.
Because I love the concept and think, great, it's integrated, but it's so fiddly.
Yeah.
And you just get too many issues for students. Oh, it's not working for me, or it's asking me to sign up, or it's not opening in my window, or where is it being shared within Zoom? So I've sort of taken the road of sort of least resistance in that sense. I share my screen and I know exactly what it is that you can see and what I'm providing you. So that's why I encourage that approach, particularly for people just starting out with a tool. It's a really good question.
All right, easy. Thank you.
All right, so look, we had a crack at a straight multiple choice activity. You voted, it updated. We can now go ahead and talk about this, etc., as our icebreaker, whatever. Very straightforward type audience engagement activity. Let's try a slightly different activity. If I was to progress this, if you were to click on your voting portal, if you've closed the window, you would need to click on the link again in the chat for voting. Otherwise, it would have rolled over when I progressed this slide, but I can see that each of you, in theory, can see this now. This time around, our multiple choice has images going on, and it's acting essentially almost like a race. We're getting updates from what the audience thinks of things. So this is a different type of engagement, but it's still just multiple choice, really. It allows us to select multiple options, but pretty engaging, something funny to talk about. We could make commentary here about, you know, the way that Brittany's never going to get up there again. She just has lost it, etc. But down the bottom of my output window here, I can see how many people have voted or engaged in the activity. Pretty quick. It sits there until the next time I want to use it. But again, that was still pretty much multiple choice. If I move on to a different type of Mentimeter activity, this time round, again, if you've closed the window, you'll need to click on the link again. Otherwise, the host will provide it back to you. But what we have now from our voting portal, as we'll see in just a moment, as the results start to come in, we have a word cloud. And so our word cloud is updating on the spot. And look, to be honest, the word cloud tool is the most popular part of activity type within Mentimeter, far and away. People seem to like using this. The more people that vote for the same thing or put the same text in, the bigger it gets on the screen. And it just keeps recentering itself as more results come in. And a lot of people will use it both synchronously and asynchronously, because in theory, the word cloud still has value down the track as 200 students have voted on it, etc., rather than just the 5 that are in your tutorial. All right, so that's we've seen 3 different activity types within Mentimeter, and I'm going to show you how to build these in just a second. The best part about this tool is how incredibly easy it is to use to create them. Each of these activities took less than 5 minutes to make. Let's move on to the next activity type. I asked you the question before about how confident you were making online audience engagement activities, or how you're feeling about it. This time around, instead of using it as multiple choice, this is still multiple choice in a way, but it situates it within a traffic light type situation here, which may be a nice prompt for you to either move on to the next thing with your students or potentially pick up the thing that they're particularly stuck with. And again, it takes just moments for people to get involved in that. We'll have one more Menti activity type. This time round, it's asking you to actually use a slider and potentially organize how you're feeling along a like it scale type approach to, in this case, your home office, things within the home office. But we're getting into ranking, prioritizing, and sorting with this type of activity. And what we can see as the results come in, they're adjusting on the spot. This is pretty visually engaging. And again, there's almost a competitive element to this. And it keeps adjusting on the spot, etc. And again, super quick to create this type of activity. You just got to have in mind what the tool set will allow you to do. But everything you can see here is customizable in terms of the continuum, the labels that are used here. Obviously, traditionally, a like it scale will have things like to a greater extent, to a lesser extent, etc. Exciting things like that. Agree, strongly disagree. You can customize all of the labels and language in this. And then we can see those results coming in there. All right, so we had a look at 4 or 5 different Menti type activities. I think it's time for us to look at the actual back end of the tool and how you build these yourself. Before I push on there, does anyone want to make any comments about their experience with Mentimeter so far this morning? Have you found it relatively straightforward and easy to use as a participant? Yep. Okay. When we look at Mentimeter, and I have a quick guide for Menti that I'll share with you in the chat for a second, but you can get it from the DLT website or from DOMS. All of our use of Mentimeter stems from mentimeter.com. It's cloud-based. When you use this tool, you will need to sign in. You want to look for the single sign-on options with your sign-in, and you can use your work login with that, and that will take you straight into the tool. I'll show you where that is. I'll just sign out so you can see the screen from scratch like I do. So here we are at our mentimeter.com first screen. You've got login or sign up. When you click on either of those, you're looking for an option that talks about SSO, single sign-on. That's what you want to click on. It's going to say, what's the name of the place that you work for? We can go for Charles Sturt University. Continue. And then it will prompt you to put in your work login details. It's remembering mine, but it's going to look for your I2 login, your CSU staff login, and then take you in to the tool set. The first screen that we get into in Mentimeter is where you have your folders essentially that you can organize your presentations. If you don't have any folders, you can create them. Otherwise, you can click on new presentation and start making presentations from there. Give it a name. And then it's going to launch the editor or the builder for your presentations. Now I'm going to take a point here to situate the language that we use in Menti. It's a presentation tool, so it uses the term presentation for each of your collections of activities. Inside the presentation, it has slides, talks about slides, the same as PowerPoint, and each activity type that we choose can sit on an individual slide. So for each slide, you get one activity. And when people vote within slides, they call them voices. So the language we're getting here is presentations, slides, voices. When we open Mentimeter on that creation panel, it's prompting us here to choose the type of activity we want to put onto the slide. And that even includes putting together content. If you were going to use it instead of PowerPoint, you can do so, but we're focusing on the audience engagement aspect. So that's why I'm looking up here. Multiple choice activities, the word cloud. You can do open response, speech bubbles, etc. from the audience if you want them to put those in. The scale activity that we were looking at a minute ago, where we were choosing how much we liked something, didn't like something, or valued it. There's a ranking activity which will ask people to drag up and down the things, their priorities for an activity. You can also set up a Q&A box. The traffic light option that I had there. There are lots and lots of activity types. I go into them in some detail in the quick guide, and I might take this opportunity to drop that into the chat for you. If nothing else, if you get a copy of that on your computer, work through it, you'll be creating your own Mentis very, very quickly. For the purpose of showing you how we build and how easy it is, I'm going to take a very simple activity. I'll go with multiple choice first. As soon as I've clicked on that, this activity is now actually live. We'll get to where we get the information for how we share it, how we present with it, but it's now created. So there's no save button. It's auto saved and it's now live on the web somewhere. All right, this preview window shows us what it looks like. Over here on the right, we start customizing the activity. We've got what we do with the content up here in the top right, and the design element is usually the end result. So in this case, do we want the multiple choice to be shown as a bar, as a donut, so to speak, or whatever this is called, pie chart? Let's go with pie chart. Or do we want our results to show up as a donut or the dot option? I'm not quite sure how the dots work. Oh, there we go. It just starts organizing people's feedback in different colors against dots. Okay, that's something. I'm going to stick to bar graph for now. I'll go back to content. First part is, what's our question going to be? So what color. See it updating on the left there. What color is the sky? Question mark right there. Now I can start customizing my options. We'll go right blue, red, what sky? And you can add further options in there, or to the right of that, you can start adding images against each of those options. Remember, we looked at the divas option and it had the images on top of the multiple choice. That's all we're doing there, multiple choice plus an image. Underneath where it says image, it's talking about sort of a wallpaper that will sit behind the activity if you wanted to do that. I'm going to keep it nice and simple at the moment. There's our question. There are our options. If I scroll down a little bit, options. Do I want to show the correct answer? Does your activity require a correct answer, or are you just getting feedback? Do you want the results to be shown as a percentage? Do you want people to be able to vote multiple times? Those are usually things that you'll get prompted for with these. I'm not dealing with segmentation today, forget that. This bit down the bottom here, instructions bar, it's talking about this thing up the top here, which instructs people when they see this to go to a particular website and put in a voting code. The way we've been using it together in Zoom, for example, is all I need to give you is a hyperlink to click on. So I don't usually provide the instruction on the slide. This is more a feature for when you want to embed this activity somewhere else where you're not going to be there. So I usually turn off the instructions because I'm going to give the audience the link to vote. All right, and do I want to show the results? I usually do. Maybe you want to hide them for some reason and just look at the results yourself later on. That's on you. Jody.
Just on the instructions. So I've found that most of the students I have use their phone to do answering stuff. And so they need the instructions to be able to access it on their phone because they wouldn't be able to access the hyperlink. So they look at like my presentation on their laptop because they usually don't have two screens, and then they do all of the filling out stuff on their phone. So I usually keep it in because I found that otherwise they sort of can't figure out how to, and I can't figure out how to get the hyperlink onto their phone.
That's an absolutely brilliant point. It all depends where you're delivering from. If you're in a lecture theatre and you put a Menti activity in, the only way the audience is going to have to engage is via those instructions. So that's a perfect point where you are. If you're in the classroom and running one of these types of activities in a non-IVT space, etc., you're going to need the instructions. I'm coming at it very selfishly from me being in a Zoom meeting where I've got control over being able to share a link with the audience.
I only do it on Zoom. It's that they look at the presentation on their laptop and they
because they've only got the one screen. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Great point. So the power is yours to decide whether or not you're going to share these, not share these. I absolutely leave it on in some situations. But yeah, it's going to depend on your own particular instance for sure. There's no harm in leaving it in there. I will point out that I'll show you in a second that this business with the codes, they only stay valid for 2 days and then a new code is generated. So sometimes there's an issue if you've taken a snapshot of this and put it somewhere to students saying, just go to here and put in this code, that number only stays valid for 2 days before it gets refreshed or updated. So if you're going to use this offline is the wrong word, but let's say outside of the live event, the code might be a slight problem. Even when you hover, you can see there it expires in 2 days. All right, so we've got our content together for our Menti. It's ready to be used. What we really want to be looking at here is how do we get this out to our audience? I'll get to you in just a sec, Nicole. And the 2 bits of information that I'd been looking for was the link that they need to be able to vote with it and the link that I want to be able to look at the results. So the output and the input, I guess, or input and output. So we're going to get to that in just a second. Nicole.
So if it only lasts for 2 days, if I've made this a week in advance for the session, when I bring it up live in the classroom or live on the online meeting, then possibly a new code will just refresh when I open it up.
Absolutely.
To share. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, okay. So it's only if I took a screenshot of it and sort of was trying to, not do it live at the time.
That's
Is that
exactly
right?
right.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank
So
you.
the hyperlink to the activity for voting is always live and active. It doesn't change. It's just that code aspect which refreshes, so to speak. Yeah. So that's it. So unless it only becomes an issue when someone's, as you said, taken a screenshot, captured that information static at that point in time and provided it later. It's usually a thing when people are using PowerPoint and they try and put Menti activity details into a PowerPoint slide. They're saying, here it is, I created it in advance. Well, the problem is the code changes in 2 days' time. So that's why that particular scenario can be problematic. All right, so let's have a look at this point about how we get the information to our audience, because as we said, this is already live. It all happens up here under the share button, top right-hand corner. When we click on share, there are 3 areas. I'll talk about each, but I'm going to start in the middle here under participation. In this grey area at the bottom, we've got our voting link, our voting portal. If I copy that and stick it in the chat pod, for example, the audience is already able to start engaging with that activity. If you were so inclined and you wanted people to vote by scanning a QR code, for whatever reason, you can generate one of those here. And that always stays accurate as well. Unlike the voting code that we talked about a minute ago, which refreshes, QR code is just a hyperlink, and the hyperlink always stays the same. So that part is okay if you were going to create QR codes for some reason. The voting code information is provided above, and that will refresh automatically, as we said. So we've got half of the equation. We've got a way for people to click on the activity and get involved. The other half is our output window, our results window, and that happens over here under presentation sharing. And there are 2 pieces of information we can get hold of here. One of them is the link to the live results. If I copied that, opened it up, we'll see my live activity already in action. Amazing, with my 0 votes and my multiple choice activities sitting there ready for input to start coming in. Beautiful. Thank you very much. And that's really all it is to creating an activity and getting it live and getting it happening and the audience participating. Of interest underneath, if you're looking at making your Menti activities exist within your website, your subject site or elsewhere, underneath you can also get a hold of the embed code. So this embed live results is going to give us a code which will take this live web page and embed it within your subject site, for example. So if you've created an activity and you want students to be able to see that output, the results, so whether it's the word cloud or multiple choice, whatever type of activity, all you need is this embed live results button. If we click on it, it's copied an embed code. If I was to go into a subject site in I2, for example, I'll just grab some random poor academics page. We'll jump into Kim's site just because we can. I'll find an area, a content area. So let's say, I'm sure they'd love to see it inside assessment 3, turn edit mode on. If I go just to build a new content item, and I click in here into the content area, because we copied an embed code, all we need to do is click on the code button, Control V. I'm going to paste that code that I got from Menti. And it is now in there ready to be used. There's my activity, and it is now living within the subject site right there. So it's live, and as more people vote and engage with this activity, this output window will continue to be updated. So this is where you get the option for asynchronous activity as well as the live meeting. And people got hands up. Nicole, go for it.
So just double check. So if we've embedded that in there, the 2-day expiry, what happens then? So it's just when I access it, I can use that code and do it there and then. And then in 2 days' time, that code will change within my site, or how
It
does that work?
refreshes, yeah, because this is just a window into the Mentimeter website. So this will automatically update.
Okay, thanks.
Right. So you don't actually need to go in there and change this at all. It will, if you leave those instructions in there, which is what Jody was talking about before, you don't need to make that change. It will automatically refresh with the new number. Yeah. Jody.
Can you put it in before, is it only as live results? Can you put it in before you do your tutorials so that people could, so if students aren't able to attend the tutorial, they could put their feedback in and then you run the tutorial and then it's live afterwards?
100%. It is live from the moment that you start creating the activity in Mentimeter.
Right. And so unlike it's like H5P or whatever, where they can complete it in the site, they still need to go out into Mentimeter, fill it in there, and then this is just sort of a picture of the results.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
So either you provide the instruction and they're using some kind of a device, their own device, a browser, their phone, whatever, to go and vote on it.
Yeah.
Or you could get your voting link, your hyperlink to vote and put it in here as well. And they could click on the link and vote. You could do that as well, but I suppose it just depends on your preference.
Okay.
What I mean by that essentially is that you could put some text in at the top saying, click here to vote first, and then put the embed code underneath.
And then you have the results come out. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, so you can do both. Yeah.
And that link won't expire. Sorry.
No, the hyperlink never expires. That's another reason why I like it, I suppose. The instruction and the code is not a problem as long as you just don't try and take a snapshot of it at one point in time. Yeah. All right. Are we comfortable with this idea of adding it in outside of just giving people links in live events? Okay, beautiful.
Lachlan, just to check there, not that it's critical, but there's no way of saying that one student has done something 5 times.
So when you create the activity in Mentimeter, one of your options that you have is to do with whether or not students can submit multiple responses. So it comes down to your which particular activity type you've got.
Yeah.
And also that information comes down to what's saved in the browser. So it's sort of to do with, even if I had this as only one response, if a student opens the same Menti up in Firefox, for example, that doesn't remember that they went in there in Chrome, they'll be able to vote again. It's one of those getting around that limitation if they wanted to. Keeping in mind, of course, Mentimeter is entirely anonymous. There's no way to identify users in here and their responses, as opposed to Zoom polls, which we'll look at shortly as well.
Thanks.
My pleasure, and welcome, Stuart McKinney. Nicole.
So I just tested then to go into the menti.com and I tried to vote again, but it already told me that I had already voted. So then I assumed that you had stopped multiple votes. So it told me I'd already voted.
And you can go in retrospectively and turn that on if you wanted to, for example. It comes down to the activity type. Things like the word cloud, for example, it'll ask you to define how many responses you want from them, how many words, how many responses. So you have that kind of level of control over configuring it. All right. I will spend probably another couple of minutes on Menti, and then I really want to get into Zoom polls. It's a lot of information to digest in this tool, and it's not hard to find any of the information. It's just you've got to have a play around. I'm going to gloss over a few bits and pieces, but I really would recommend that you have a look at the quick guide, but get in here and just click on things and start seeing what you can do to customize. Remember, we talked about that kind of the language of presentation, slides, and voices. If you want to make more activities within the same link, within the same activity, it means adding more slides to put more activities on, at which point you'd click new slide, add in another type of activity, for example, and it's going to roll through as a presentation, the same as if we were using PowerPoint, needing to progress the slides, so to speak. When I use Menti, most of the time, I'm usually only creating one activity on one slide or one link at a time and then doing something with it. I don't usually create multi-activity presentations that I need to manually progress. I usually just create the one with the link and give that to the students to engage with. And then later on, if I'm going to run another one, I'll probably have a separate hyperlink and give it to them. You can go either way. It's just that I don't have that many situations where I'm asking people to sit there and watch while I move to the next activity and the next activity and the next activity. There's usually gaps because I'm teaching or I'm doing other things in between. So I've usually found it a bit easier to collect my activity voting links and output portals and access them when I need to. Does that make sense? So yeah, you can absolutely create as many slides and as many activities in a row as you want. But once you launch the activity, that output window we looked at, for example, if I had another activity after this, I would have to hit my right arrow or click on it to progress it to the next one. Right. So, and then it's kind of ready to go. So there's just that sort of fiddliness of needing to control and move to the next thing and potentially provide the voting link again, or the instructions are there. So maybe I'm just being finicky, that's all. All right, a couple of other things to look at in the back end of Mentimeter. You don't have to go it alone, so to speak, in Mentimeter if you want other people to be able to also have access to the same Mentimeter's activities that you're creating. Under the share button, there is a third tab, Invite Collaborators. When you click on that, it's going to give you this information saying only team members. Team member means CSU people that have registered for Mentimeter. So if they've gone in and signed in via single sign-on, SSO, then they'll be in this list and you can invite them. So if I turned around and said, oh, Jodie's used this before. If I looked for Jay Brabin, for example, at CSU, oh, there she is. I could click on that, click on invite, and now she has access to the same Mentimeter activities. The same one that we have here, she could then go into and edit herself, or if she wasn't going to touch mine, she could then duplicate this one and make her own. So at that point, you have an easy way to kind of get people either sharing the same one or duplicating, making their own. You know, Stuart might reach out after this and say, Lachlan, that word cloud you had is brilliant. I want it. I promise I won't mess with yours. Then I invite him, he duplicates and makes his own. Make sense?
Duplication button.
So you've got two options. One of them is you can click on an individual slide in here and duplicate it. You could copy the activity on the slide to a whole other presentation somewhere else if you wanted to. Or if we go back to our collection of folders and activities, if you went into one of those activities and looked at its options over on the right, you can duplicate from there as well. So there's a couple of different ways to copy the presentation, so to speak.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. So we have absolutely rushed through Mentimeter fairly quickly for a tool set that has lots and lots and lots going on. But I really strongly encourage you to get in here and make a new presentation and start looking at the different activity types. Nicole.
So just going back to that one that Stuart asked. So if I'm convening a subject and I've got 5 lecturers from 5 different campuses, I could invite them as collaborators. And so this is the question for, the 1,000 students across the 5 campuses. Then would they go into shared templates to access that as part of the class, or do they need to make their own?
So there's a couple of answers to this. One of them is you would only invite them as collaborators if the expectation was that they were going to be editing and making more Mentimeter activities, for example. If the intention was purely to distribute the activity, all you would need to do is give them the voting link, the hyperlink to give to students, and the link to the output window to see the results, because you could still just keep using the same activity. All you need to do is kind of share that information. If they're going to be collaborators,
not collaborators as such, it'd be just more, this is the presentation, this is the question, right? This is your Mentimeter poll that I want you to ask the students in class, getting the QR coded or whatever. So I'd share the QR code with the lecturers, and then how would they then access the results live?
So the results are always going to be from the output window. So if you go into the share button and click on presentation sharing, that's where you're going to find those results.
So I'd have to share the participation and the presentation sharing. I'd have to share 2 codes for the lecturers.
Yeah, you give them those 2 pieces of information. The link to the output, to the results, and the link for either voting or, I wouldn't be sending them the voting information. It's going to appear on the slide if you want them using that.
Yeah, okay.
You just copy the link,
Yeah, okay, thanks.
You're welcome. All right, am I right to move on to 15 minutes of fun in Zoom polls? Let's do that. Let me bring up this first. Okay, I'm going to talk about the back end of Zoom polls first. Inside Zoom, it has a polling tool. They've made some improvements on it over the past 12 months. Previously, all it would allow you to do is launch multiple choice or single choice questions. Fairly inflexible, and so people were looking for alternatives. They've made some adjustments to it. It is better now. You have 2 ways of accessing it. Firstly, let me say that this is only going to be available to hosts generally. So the person and the polls exist at the meeting level. They are attached to the meeting that you are creating them within. So it's not that we can go into somewhere in the back end of Zoom and just work on all of our polls in a collection or repository. The polls are in addition to individual meetings. That becomes important when we talk about how do I get that great poll that I used over there into this meeting over here. It's quite difficult in Zoom to share polls across different meetings. They exist at an individual meeting level. And I'll open up Zoom in a second in the back end and show you where that is. You can create polls in advance. So if you know that in Thursday's online tutorial meeting, you're going to want a poll, you can go into that meeting beforehand and create the poll ready to be used. You can also create a poll as a host in the live meeting. So when I talk about the front end and the back end, I'm really talking about the time when you want to make the thing. So if you're saying I want to create it in advance, you would go into the back end before the meeting, and we're going to do that right now, create the poll, and then when you have the meeting itself, launch the poll. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to close some of these Menti windows first because they're all over the shop. Let's get into Zoom. So I'm going into the Zoom portal, charlessturt.zoom.us. I'm going to sign in. And what I'm looking at, if I look at my meeting list, I've got a session next Tuesday, for example. I want to create some polls for that session. So I need to go into that meeting. And this is a summary of information about the meeting that's already been created. And you'll notice that there are some tabs up the top. Details, that's the screen we're all familiar with. The second one is polls and quizzes. If we click on that, it says, right, there's no polls in here yet. I can create a poll. It asks me to choose between simple polls, which is single or multiple choice, or advanced polls, which has a few other question types like dragging and dropping type activities, but also open response. And this is something that was missing from Zoom before, where people saying, when I poll the students, I want to see what they have to say, not necessarily just multiple choice responses. So the advanced one is where we're going to get into that in a second. I'll choose simple for now, click next. And I have a choice between single choice, one option, which I would call multiple choice, to be honest. The language here is not helpful, but when we say single choice, it means a single answer. or multiple choice, which is in fact allowing you to select multiple responses. So when you say to someone, what things from the list below do you feel strongly about? Multiple answers apply or whatever. They can select more than one if you've chosen multiple choice. I'll stick with single for the moment and say again, how are you feeling today? And then they've got multiple choices in there. You can edit that text. And then the activity, when I hit save, is ready to be used. I want to just point out here that polls has changed now so that we can enable a feature that will create breakout rooms based on student responses. So if you had an activity that asked students to choose from a list, and we turn this button on, when we finish launching the poll, Zoom will automatically have created breakout rooms based on those responses and allocated students to those breakout rooms based on their choice. Something you probably want to play around with and have a few trial runs with, but there's some potential in there, I think. Karina.
Sorry, this is a little bit unrelated, but when I was on the Zoom meeting with you the other day, there was a lady who said, can you make the breakout rooms in advance? But if students know what group they're going into, then they can select the choice and then it'll automatically take them to a breakout room.
It is a way to get around that problem. Absolutely.
There you go. Anyway,
absolutely. Yeah, I think the pre-creating of breakout rooms is problematic because it wants to identify user accounts and things. Doing it this way and getting the students to actually opt into the room that they want to join, etc., is a way around that. You can also create breakouts and let people choose which one they want to go into. So it's just a different way. You can use a poll to do it, where it will identify which room they go into, or you could do that through breakouts. Anyway, separate session. Someone else had another question.
No, all good.
All good, okay. So that's our simple poll type. You can also change the label for it if you like. You can add more than one question in a list, so it runs through different types of questions inside. When you add another one, it still only will let you choose the same type of Zoom poll question. So you can't add in an advanced type question following a simple one using this kind of add additional questions. So it's sitting there, and as it says, not launched, right? So that can only happen in the live meeting. The other type, I'll just show you the options under advanced poll types. We get at this point single choice, multiple choice, a matching activity where you've got your left and your right and they have to drag which ones go with which responses, a ranking activity, which will be a drag and drop as to prioritizing which go where. But underneath, and this is again, by and large, the thing that people have been asking for a long time with this, is open response, short answer or long answer responses where people can just type in free text responses to things and they will be displayed. And you'll notice that we have some more options underneath the advanced types. So if I said, I'm going to make a short answer question, some of those options have disappeared. Multiple choice, if I go back, there's more options. One of them is mandatory question or not. Do we force everyone in the room to do that before they can move on to the next question? Do we want the answers to be shown as a drop-down? That's kind of a whatever type thing for me. And secondly, lastly, the option to create breakout rooms is only available based on multiple choice type questions. So you can't create breakouts based on open response. It would be impossible. All right, so that's what happens with our advanced types. If I choose short answer, I get to specify how many characters go in. This is not words, characters go into the box. But you can choose long answer and you'll get more characters going in. To be honest, if you're asking students to write an essay in the middle of a Zoom meeting, I don't know how engaging that would be. Anyway, it's possible. Let me hop out of that. It will prompt and say, do you want to save it as a draft for later? But to be honest, if you're not launching it, draft or not draft is kind of irrelevant. All right. What does this look like in the live meeting? So I created some polls before today's meeting for this Zoom meeting. I'll show you my Zoom screen. Down the bottom, as the host who made the meeting and created the polls, if I click on the polls button, I have 2 polls sitting there ready to be used, one simple, one advanced. Tells me how many questions. I can now launch those, or I can click on the options button. Edit will bring up that same edit pane we were looking at a minute ago that I can work on the questions. I can duplicate the question if I wanted to modify it to some extent, or I can delete it. I'm going to launch one. Let's see what it looks like for you as participants. I've launched a simple poll. It is important to point out with Zoom polls that your audience cannot see the results that you can see here because I'm sharing my screen. They can't see those results coming in until you finish the poll. Right, so that's a difference between Menti and Zoom. With Menti, I've got someone that's joined the session late. Anyway, with Menti, for example, we can show the live results as they're coming in, streaming in, and it's kind of part of the interactivity. With Zoom, audience votes, doesn't see the live feedback until you close the poll. The caveat there is if you're sharing your screen like I am, you can show the audience the results because that's what the host could see. And it's showing them as a percentage. So I could say, right, 40% of the audience thinks the crispy M&Ms are the best ones, et cetera, et cetera. So you voted in this. I can see here that 100% of the audience or 5 of the people in here have voted. And it shows me a timer. How long has it been running? And I can now end the poll. And I now have a choice of whether I want to create breakout rooms based on the responses. So it would put all of you crispy people together, or I can share the results, at which point you get to see this same screen as participants as I do. So that's the control over when the information is shared out to the audience. So yeah, I like it, but I'm not completely decided on how useful the functionality is compared to Menti in a way. Different activity types. I think the creating of the breakouts thing has some real potential. Just got to think about how that might apply in terms of activities and timing in a Zoom session. I don't like having to choose to share the results, to be honest. I want people to see that as it's coming in because I usually feel that that's part of the interactivity of it. So that was a simple type. I'm going to stop sharing the results with you. I have some options now underneath at the bottom that are of my poll that I have run, such as relaunch the same poll. Do we want to ask people if their position has changed on this later in the Zoom session, for example, or whatever? Do I want to get the results downloaded as an Excel document so that I can use that information later on? Or do I want to look at the results separately in a browser window? You know, you've got a few options there with your poll. Or I can go back to my control of my poll list. It tells me that that one's ended. I can relaunch. We also have our advanced question type. Let's have a look at what that looks like. This time round, it's asking you, the audience, 5 words or less, how do you feel about Vegemite? And then it's going to tell me how many people have put in responses. It's coming up there. Can you still see my screen? I'll just confirm. Yep. And those results are coming in. It's interesting that it sees underneath the number of people that have responded. It's actually the number of people that have started to type into the poll, not the number of people in the room, right? And so even though this might say that there are 30 people in there, if 5 of them have started to type in there, it'll say 5 out of like 100% have answered. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Again, I can't see your results yet. But if I share the results now, hopefully it's showing you what those information is. I can see down here an option that says view the detail. For me, the Zoom detail is opening up the back end of Zoom via a web page. And I can see here, right, not too nice if it's not too thick. I don't want it, yuck, etc. Getting more responses. Tell me what this looked like for you in the Zoom meeting itself.
I can only see my answer.
Yeah, me too.
Ah, how interesting. All right, so it's not showing the results publicly.
No.
Let's find out why that is. If we go back and I look at my second poll, I'm going to stop sharing it. Can I edit this poll? Download the results. Now, what I want to say is when I created the poll initially, there was an option for the advanced ones for the responses to be anonymous. And I feel like maybe that still shouldn't have stopped you seeing the results. Huh. All right, I'm going to have to investigate that one a little bit more. So at the moment, we're saying the open response only allowed you to see in the Zoom meeting your own response. So unless you share that output, looking at the results with your audience via a share screen, they can't see what everyone else put in. So it's possible, but there's a workaround. Okay, slight limitation then. So if I was to ask you very briefly, how do we feel about Zoom polls at the moment? Do you see some potential for them? What do we think? Thumbs up from Annette.
If you could ask the same question, if you wanted to get, say, students' response after each tutorial session, and you actually ask the same question or the same questions each time, and you were to export them, then you would have a record, could you, say from weeks 1 to weeks 10, and you could use that as a thermometer maybe to see, you know, are there ebbs and flows of how students are responding. I don't know. We're just looking at that export factor, whether that would be useful or not.
That's a good point. Let me show you one other thing to keep in mind. If you have used, I better delete this before Kim kills me, by the way. If you have created the meeting in your online meeting tool, the LTI in the subject side, so the meeting you've created exists inside here, you've gone into the back end and created polls, then you've had your meeting, run your polls. The information for those polls is actually captured underneath the report for the meeting. It actually lives in here because you have a poll report option. So that idea of capturing the results or the feedback over time will actually happen automatically in this tool. You can also get poll information by running a report in the back end of Zoom, but to be honest, it's too much work for me. I would rather it be captured automatically. And if the meeting is inside your online meeting tool, which most people are using in their subject sites, then the poll feedback will automatically be captured in here as well. Yeah, can be exported, etc., but it's already happening. So no, that's a really good point. Other comments, feedback, etc., before we wind up?
Zoom still seems a little bit kind of clunky, but I think there's some improvements on it, definitely, particularly the breakout groups as a way of doing a quiz and breakout groups. I think that's a really cool feature.
Yeah, I feel like there's real potential for it, but it makes me think that I'm going to have to kind of reverse map how I build the polls.
Yeah.
With the idea of ultimately I want breakout groups based on this thing. So it's reverse mapping in that sense.
But it also does feel like it's just a workaround of the fact that it'd be better just to be able to pre-do groups. So
yeah, okay, absolutely. I agree. Now, did I put anything amazing in here in these slides that we need to cover? The limitation between the simple and the advanced question types if you want to get open response. Another way of looking at that potentially is we could just use the chat pod if I wanted open response, maybe. The fact that you can capture it and export it, handy. Creating the breakout rooms, yep, we've picked that up already. And there's more choices in there versus the simple ones. I don't like the not being able to share the live responses thing. That kind of is annoying. And me having to then share my screen and show them my responses, it's a bit too fiddly for me, but I think that's about it. The results being accessed through the online meeting LTI. Okay, that's handy. And there is an option when you're creating them to make the responses anonymous or not. I just have to find out where that is. Okay, so will there be a PD session on breakout rooms? I can run them. We looked at them a little bit in the session Was it this week or the other week? I can't remember. But yeah, I'm absolutely happy to run PD in and around breakouts specifically. Or we can catch up about them. I think I've got some recordings in and around breakouts as well. Look, I'm aware time has gotten away from us again, so I would take this moment to say thank you all for coming out and participating in our session on online audience engagement today, Menti and Zoom. Grab the quick guide, obviously, from either the link in the session today or from the DLT website on Mentimeter. And by all means, send any feedback you have on using these, whether it's great or not great, through to me, because I think we're going to try and agitate to get some more tools in the tool set this year. I think it's the argument that the funding is not there, etc. It doesn't really stack up anymore. These things, membership for them is far, far cheaper than some of the other things we spend money on here. So we might agitate to get some more tools in the toolbox, so to speak, if we can. Otherwise, I will be hanging around for a minute if people have other questions, etc. I'll stop the recording now.